Everybody, welcome back. We are at episode 90 today, and I don't know where time goes, Jack, but it flies.
It has flown. Yeah, I think we've done 90 eps in almost a year. It's bamboozling.
It is bamboozling. That's the right word. And I must say, I'm glad to have my partner in crime back. I did my first solo episode, ep 89. If you want to go back, it's just one behind. It's not too old. I think there's a few gems in there. It's certainly centered around marketing and social media, and it's
going to be our topic today. Today we're talking content. Jess, it's more your world than mine. Content, from an outside perspective, seems to be just like a never-ending pursuit of new and better ideas and things to keep people excited and talking about your brand.
Yep.
It's obviously pretty exhausting. For a young brand out there, like, I suppose, is there an end goal for content or where they should be shooting?
Well, firstly, I definitely understand what you're saying. You know, you look at Instagram stories, they're 24 hours, they're gone the next day. No one ever hits you up about, hey, how good was your story 3 weeks ago? Like, that doesn't happen on social media. No one ever sends you a TikTok that was sent, made a year ago. It's always the latest TikTok or the latest Instagram story that's sent. So we do live in a seriously fast-paced environment. And yeah, some mornings I wake up and go, shit, got to reinvent the wheel again this morning. But with all that said, Jack, there's definitely a strategy that we've seen with brands we've actually had on this podcast, some of the most successful brands that have been on this podcast implement. And I really want to break it down today. If I'm being selfish for us, I think there's a lot to take from it.
Yeah.
Especially coming into November, we have our biggest campaign yet.
Yep.
So certainly going to look to implement a lot of what we've learned, but just hit my laptop. But also want to describe that plan really simply for brands, so I think they can emulate it themselves.
Cool. Before we get to that, let's talk about us at Colour Plan a little bit and how we break down and define types of content. So there's two.
Yep.
And Jess, you obviously know these very, very well. Internal content, which we define as in-house. We have control of it. It's our photo shoot for our campaign.
Yep.
It's the models we pick.
Good example.
It's the content you make on TikTok.
Yeah, everything we do ourselves.
Gotcha. Cool. And external content is the other one, and that comes from the public. It's an outside source, something we might not have full control over. How do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the most clear one would be the creators we send to, or our customers that buy our products that post them on their story. That is content we can use as marketing. But as you said, we don't always have control over it. We might send out a few hoodies to a creator and they never post. It's out of our control. So I think as a brand, you need to do, of course, both these things. I would look at the internal content as your bedrock, your foundation as a brand. That's what you can control. That's what everyone's going to perceive you as. And then the external content is the exciting part, Jack, because that's where you can really scale a brand. You can only do so much internally. Especially us, we have a team of 3 or 4. We'll go 4. It changes every week how big our team is, decreases. But lately, hopefully increases by...
Get to the point.
Sorry. But I think external content, that's the scale right there. Because if you sell to 100 customers and half of them post, then you've just got 50 pieces of content that can grow your brand. And if those 50 pieces of content are on brand and build your brand's narrative, that's as good as it gets.
Yep. So that's where we're going to focus today. We're going to focus on the external, not to, not touch on the internal. It's still very, very important. We'll touch on a little bit, but the external is where we're focusing. And we're going to do that by, I suppose, highlighting 2 brands that we know very, very well who have knocked their external content out of the park.
Sure have.
Both
been on the potty.
Both been on the potty. Yep.
Well, yeah, and we're going to, of course, tell you those 2 brands and we're going to dive into their strategy. But just before we do that, I want to make clear both these brands are very different in their approach, yet both of them do some things that don't change and that are absolute staples. So the staples are this. You as a brand need to always be sending out product. This is the day and age we live in. That can be locally, that can be internationally, but I believe the best brands do that and they do it effectively. And not only do they send out lots of product, they send it out to the right people. To define the right people, essentially are people that fuck with your brand. Simply put, there's nothing worse than sending to a creator and they don't really, their say style doesn't align with your own brand, and they never post. It's a really shallow feeling. On the flip side of that, there's nothing better than sending your products to someone that already loves them. And you can tell, like in their response, they're like, wow, shit, I can't wait to get those on. And when they do and they love it, they will post multiple times. They'll tell their friends about your brand. That's the person you want to be sending to. But Jack, let's dive into these two unbelievable brands.
Yes, let's jump in, Jess. So as you mentioned, they're both different in their approaches, very similar but different. And that's mainly because the first brand focuses on TikTok to seed and get their external content. And the second brand is Instagram. So let's start with the TikTok side of things. And that brand is, Jesse?
Mercha. We've got Aaron running the brand, who was incredible on this podcast. He came on, about 60 episodes.
One of our first ones.
Yeah, a while ago. But do scroll down, Mercha. They have absolutely crushed it. I think when we had the title of their podcast episode was from 0 to 10,000 followers. Mm-hmm. And I think on Instagram now they're at about 70,000. And that was this year. So the year hasn't finished. They'll probably hit 100,000 followers by the end of this year. Unforeseen growth, unbelievable. So let's really figure out why they're growing in the way they're growing. It's something I spend a lot of time thinking about because they're such a great example. And what I've seen with them, Jack, is their external strategy is international. So Aaron's done an incredible job of getting his products out to the UK, to all over Europe, Germany, France. And what that's involved is understanding things like the weather differences over there. And Aaron's products, again, back to sending to the right people, certainly marry themselves to the aesthetic of overseas. That's another thing. As Australian brands, sometimes, we don't quite line up with that European fashion sense. Mm-hmm. We hear it a lot, we're always a few years behind. So again, make sure your products are on point. Make sure the people you're choosing are willing to wear those products, because it's not cheap shipping to Europe. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg. So don't screw that up. Make sure you do your homework correctly. And I think just the other day, Jack, I was going through TikTok and I saw this French fashion influencer talk about Mercha in French. And all I could hear was the words Mercha and then just wee and a whole other bunch of words. But that's cool. I think the video had 100,000 views. So the fact that he's cracked the code internationally, I don't think there's a better way to do it, by the way. I think that's for any brand listening right now, I think that is the way you go internationally today, fast. And yeah, so credit to Aaron. Unbelievable job.
So then that's the TikTok side of things. How does Instagram differ from a TikTok seeding strategy?
It's similar but very different, right? So I like to look at the brand Earls. Louis Brown's a close friend of ours, and he's come on this podcast, and that was another exceptional episode. And Louis is different with his brand. He's been around a lot longer than Aaron. I think Aaron's been around close to maybe 1.5 years. I know Earl's probably about 5-6 years. So off the bat, they're very different in that sense. And of course, Louis doesn't do TikTok, probably being of that older generation, whereas Aaron's a lot younger. So we have to make those differences clear. With that said, Earl's hasn't always implemented an incredible seeding strategy. I think he knows, coming from that sporting background, athletes are a big part of their brand. And there's probably not an athlete in Australasia, so it was a bit of a tongue twister, that hasn't worn Earl's at this point. It's that big of a brand. And look, the main difference, Jack, is Louis really utilizes Instagram stories to paint his brand's picture. Of course, as we said, internally he gets his shoots correct. Like, he doesn't ever fumble on that. But he understands externally that he doesn't need to go out and do any more content. He does his campaigns, and then he has, his thousands of customers and his close network of creators that just paint the best picture of Earls, I think, personally.
It's funny looking from afar, because Louis has been doing it for so long in terms of seeding product and sending it out and restoring people, taking photos of them in his product. It's funny how now it almost seems like the people that are receiving the garments, or the customers that receive the garments, almost know the types of photos they have to take for it to be restored by Louis, which is just fucking genius, because it means that he's getting 100 photos from people that's on brand, on trend, and he only posts the ones that align. But now all of them ultimately align.
And you've hit the nail on the head. And I think that's probably the most important thing to be said on this episode and to be learned, because that is where you want to end up. As a brand, if you can paint such a clear picture over a long period of time about what your brand stands for through stories or through TikTok, and then your own customers start buying and showing that. So you just have free marketing off what you've been selling. You're no longer probably having to seed, not having to spend hundreds of dollars on shipping and fooling around when they don't post and dealing with all the bullshit. You've got people that love the brand, that know how to wear the brand, and then almost sell the brand for you. That is where brands want to end up, Jack.
Yeah, that's the sustainable strategy, I suppose, the component of it, isn't it? And that's why it sits in the external, because internally you can only ever do so much.
Correct. And don't get me wrong, like you can do a lot internally. I'll never like let that up. Like you can do lots, you can paint a serious picture internally, but I think externally, especially with things like overseas, it's very hard to penetrate a market, you know, from just your internal story. Look to go external. But if I'm a young brand, Jack, I'm doing both. I'm playing around on TikTok. I'm playing around on Instagram. Some people will be suited more to others. Different brands, their products, I'd say, you look at Aaron, he's doing a lot of fleeces and a lot of straight leg pants and like parachute pants. That's a lot more Japanese and European. So that lends itself to an overseas market. Where if you're doing more things like boxy t-shirts, more, you know, I'd say hats, things like that, it's a bit more Australian in its nature, you know, so maybe even a bit more American. So it depends what products you're doing as well.
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, we're excited. We got another retail drop coming up. It's been a long time coming. We're definitely keen to trial a lot of these different strategies for our retail drops. So I suppose we'll see how they go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a while between drinks, as they say. We've been through a lot of internal changes, a lot of which you guys would know about, speaking about them on this podcast, and with our manufacturers going, coming, changing, you know, certain things. So it feels really good now, Jack, that we have everything cemented, the floor starting to actually stay stable, which is nice. And yeah, keen to dive into November.
Cool. Thanks, guys.